A lonely rock stood surrounded by crashing Atlantic waves, miles from the nearest safe harbor. No beach, no shelter, no calm water. Yet workers somehow built a massive stone lighthouse there using hand tools, wooden cranes, sailing boats, and sheer determination long before diesel engines or modern construction equipment existed. How could anyone raise thousands of tons of granite where the sea fought every single step? That's exactly the story you're about to discover. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and if forgotten engineering stories fascinate you, consider subscribing so you never miss the next remarkable journey into history. Most people assume lighthouse construction began with stone. It actually began with observation. Long before the first block left a quarry, experienced engineers spent weeks studying tides, currents, wind, and the movement of waves. Choosing the wrong location meant wasting years of work and thousands of pounds because the ocean would eventually reclaim everything. Dangerous reefs earned their reputation for a reason. Hidden beneath changing tides, they had already wrecked countless fishing boats and merchant ships. Captains often knew these hazards existed, yet darkness, fog, or violent weather left little chance of avoiding them. A permanent warning had become essential. Surveying those isolated rocks demanded patience rather than speed. Small boats approached only during calm weather, timing every landing with a falling tide. Crews climbed onto slippery granite carrying measuring rods, notebooks, and simple surveying instruments. They worked quickly because the returning sea allowed very little time before swallowing the rock once again. Conditions changed constantly. Calm water at sunrise could become dangerous before midday. Strong winds pushed boats away from the landing point. Sudden swells crashed across the reef without warning, forcing everyone back offshore before measurements were complete. Progress depended entirely on nature's cooperation. Accurate records mattered from the very beginning. Engineers measured the height of the exposed rock, calculated tidal ranges, studied wave direction, and identified the strongest sections of bedrock. Those notes determined whether a lighthouse could survive for generations or disappear during its first major storm. Attention then shifted inland. Nearby quarries became just as important as the reef itself because the tower required thousands of carefully shaped granite blocks. Builders searched for stone that resisted salt water, remained strong under constant impact, and could be cut into precise shapes without cracking. Each block followed a carefully prepared plan before leaving the quarry. Skilled masons shaped rough granite into exact dimensions, leaving small adjustments for the construction site. Every finished stone received an identification mark showing its future position inside the tower, allowing workers to assemble the structure like an enormous three-dimensional puzzle. Moving those blocks created another challenge. Heavy wagons carried granite from the quarry to coastal harbors, where sailing vessels waited to transport the cargo across open water. Captains balanced every load carefully because uneven weight could threaten the stability of the boat long before reaching the reef. Nothing arrived by accident. Food, timber, ropes, iron tools, drinking water, and building stone followed carefully organized schedules whenever weather opened a safe window. Missing supplies could delay progress for days because replacement deliveries depended entirely on changing sea conditions. Months of preparation finally brought everything together. Engineers understood the reef. Masons had shaped the stone. Sailors stood ready with loaded vessels. Only one obstacle remained. The ocean itself still had to be conquered before the first permanent foundation could touch solid rock. Selecting the perfect location solved the planning problem. The real test began when workers stepped onto wave-covered granite and attempted something many believed the sea would never allow: a foundation built directly into living bedrock. Imagine standing on a narrow reef with waves breaking around your boots, knowing the tide will soon erase your workplace. That was the reality for the first construction crews. If you're enjoying this journey into forgotten engineering, subscribe now so you don't miss the next story hidden beneath history. The greatest challenges were only beginning. Work started the moment the falling tide exposed enough solid rock. Crews hurried ashore carrying drills, chisels, iron bars, hammers, and measuring tools. Nobody wasted a minute because the sea followed its own schedule. Every hour lost meant waiting for another favorable tide before construction could continue. Instead of placing stone directly onto uneven granite, builders first reshaped the reef itself. Skilled masons chipped away weak sections and leveled stronger areas by hand until a stable platform emerged. Careful measurement guided every strike, because an uneven foundation would magnify tiny errors all the way to the lantern room, hundreds of feet above. Iron drills and heavy sledges gradually opened holes deep into the exposed bedrock. Black powder blasted away stubborn sections where hand tools alone proved too slow. Broken rock disappeared into waiting boats while fresh surfaces revealed stronger granites beneath. Little by little, nature's irregular shape became a dependable base for construction. Meanwhile, stonecutters prepared the lowest course with extraordinary care. These foundation blocks differed from ordinary masonry because each one locked tightly against its neighbors. Dovetail joints, carefully carved shoulders, and hidden iron fasteners prevented movement even when enormous waves struck from different directions. Every completed stone carried a matching number carved into its surface. Workers never guessed where a block belonged. Quarry records, construction drawings, and identification marks ensured each piece reached its exact position. Organization saved valuable time whenever calm weather created another opportunity to build. Wooden derricks standing on temporary platforms lifted granite into place using ropes, pulleys, and block and tackle systems powered entirely by human strength. Teams pulled together while experienced foremen watched every movement. Steady coordination mattered far more than raw force because one uncontrolled swing could damage both stone and scaffold. Once each block settled into position, masons checked every joint before lowering the next course. Small adjustments happened immediately using chisels and wooden wedges. Gaps remained unacceptable because powerful Atlantic storms would eventually test every connection without mercy. Construction advanced only a few courses at a time before rising water forced everyone back aboard the waiting boats. Hours of exhausting effort sometimes produced what looked like very little progress. Experienced engineers understood something others often overlooked. Strong foundations grew slowly because lasting strength could never be rushed. After weeks of disciplined work, the lowest levels finally stood above the highest tides. For the first time, crews had created something the sea could not immediately erase. That small victory changed everything. Building upward had finally become possible. The foundation had survived its first battles with the ocean. Now the builders faced an even greater challenge, lifting thousands of tons of granite higher and higher, while fierce winds, crashing waves, and isolation fought every step of the climb. Solid foundations finally gave the builders something they had never enjoyed before: a secure place to stand. Even then, nothing about the next stage became easy. Every new layer of granite increased the height, the weight, and the danger, while the Atlantic continued testing the unfinished structure day after day. Large timber derricks soon appeared above the growing walls. Built from heavy oak beams and strengthened with thick rope rigging, these simple lifting machines became the construction site's greatest advantage. They relied entirely on block and tackle systems, allowing groups of workers to raise stone blocks that no individual could ever move alone. Each lift followed a carefully practiced routine. Sailors steadied supply boats below while rigging crews attached ropes around the waiting granite. Men hauling from different positions pulled together under shouted commands until the load slowly climbed through the air. Balance mattered constantly because even a slight swing could damage finished masonry or break valuable equipment. Wind introduced another danger that builders could never predict completely. A calm morning sometimes became a violent afternoon before the next stone reached its place. Experienced foremen watched changing skies almost as closely as they watched the lifting gear. Whenever conditions turned unsafe, construction stopped immediately despite the precious time being lost. High above the waves, masons waited for each block to arrive. Wooden guide poles helped control the final movement while iron bars nudged the stone into position. Small timber wedges held the weight temporarily until every joint matched the surrounding course with complete accuracy. No mortar carried the entire burden alone. Many offshore lighthouses depended upon carefully shaped granite blocks that locked into one another through interlocking joints. The tremendous weight of the finished tower actually strengthened the structure by pressing every stone more firmly into place. Carpenters remained just as important as the masons. They constantly repaired scaffolding, replaced weather-damaged platforms, inspected ladders, and reinforced lifting frames weakened by salt, wind, and endless moisture. Without those wooden structures, construction would have stopped within days. Blacksmiths supported the project as well. Iron tools dulled quickly against hard granite. Ropes wore through metal fittings and lifting hooks endured enormous strain every working day. Portable forges allowed damaged equipment to be repaired instead of waiting weeks for replacements from shore. Life at the construction site demanded unusual discipline. Supplies arrived only when weather allowed safe landings. Food, fresh water, timber, and iron had to be carefully managed because shortages could halt progress without warning. Every successful day depended upon planning completed long before sunrise. Month after month the tower climbed steadily above the Atlantic. Passing ships watched the strange stone column growing where open water had existed before. Few sailors fully understood the effort hidden inside those rising walls. They saw only the result, never the thousands of careful decisions that made each additional course possible. The structure finally stood high enough to dominate the surrounding reef. One final challenge remained before it could protect a single ship. A strong tower meant nothing unless sailors could actually see it through darkness, rain, and thick coastal fog. Granite had conquered the waves. The next task would conquer the night itself, transforming a silent stone tower into a beacon capable of guiding countless ships safely home. Towering walls alone could not prevent shipwrecks. Sailors needed something visible long after sunset during thick fog and through violent coastal storms. The final stage of construction transformed an impressive stone structure into a working lighthouse capable of protecting lives across open water. Near the top of the completed tower, carpenters and metal workers assembled the lantern room. Strong iron framing supported large glass panels designed to resist fierce winds while allowing light to spread in every direction. Every section had to fit tightly because even small gaps allowed moisture and salt to damage the equipment inside. Glass manufacturing demanded exceptional skill during the 19th century. Large curved panes remained difficult and expensive to produce, so many lantern rooms relied on carefully arranged flat sections joined inside iron frames. This design created both strength and excellent visibility without sacrificing durability. Attention then shifted toward the lighting system itself. Early lighthouses depended on oil lamps fueled by whale oil, vegetable oil, or later kerosene. Lighthouse keepers trimmed the wicks constantly because a weak or uneven flame reduced the distance ships could safely recognize the signal. Everything changed after the introduction of the Fresnel lens. Instead of producing a larger flame, engineers surrounded the existing light with hundreds of carefully shaped glass prisms that gathered scattered rays and concentrated them into a brilliant beam reaching far beyond the horizon. Crafting those optical systems required extraordinary patience from skilled glassmakers. Every prism occupied a precise location inside the circular framework. Even slight misalignment weakened the final beam, reducing the lighthouse's ability to guide approaching vessels during dangerous weather. Workers carefully raised the completed lens into the lantern room using ropes and timber lifting equipment. Once inside, experienced mechanics adjusted every component until the entire assembly remained perfectly level. Tiny corrections often produced dramatic improvements in the strength and clarity of the finished light. Many major lighthouses also relied on clockwork mechanisms hidden beneath the lantern. Heavy weights slowly descended through the center of the tower, turning gears that rotated the lens at a constant speed. Different flashing patterns allowed experienced captains to recognize individual lighthouses, even when several stood along the same coastline. From that moment forward, the tower became more than a construction project. Fishermen found safer routes home after dark. Merchant captains avoided reefs that had destroyed generations of ships. Coastal communities gained more reliable trade because navigation became safer throughout the year. Yet the greatest success remained almost invisible. Visitors admired the finished lighthouse without seeing the quarrymen shaping granite, the sailors battling rough seas with impossible cargo, the blacksmiths repairing worn equipment, or the laborers whose exhausting work disappeared beneath the completed structure. By the time the first powerful beam swept across the water, many builders had already moved on to another distant project. Their names rarely appeared in newspapers, but their craftsmanship continued protecting strangers they would never meet. Ships finally sailed with greater confidence because the lighthouse had begun doing its job. The people responsible for that achievement, however, quietly faded into history, while the towers they built continued standing against the sea. Centuries later, most visitors remember the lighthouse. Very few remember the people who built it. The finished tower became a landmark, while the men whose hands shaped every stone slowly disappeared from public memory. Their achievements survived. Their stories rarely did. Construction demanded far more than skilled masons alone. Surveyors identified suitable reefs, quarrymen extracted massive granite blocks from solid rock, stonecutters shaped each piece to match detailed construction plans. Sailors transported impossible cargo through dangerous coastal waters. Carpenters built scaffolding, lifting frames, and temporary shelters. Blacksmiths repaired tools that wore down against unforgiving granite. Every trade supported the next. Life on the construction site remained physically exhausting from beginning to end. Workers rose before daylight whenever favorable tides offered a chance to continue building. Meals were simple, sleeping quarters were cramped, and long periods of bad weather often trapped entire crews on isolated rocks or anchored vessels. Storms created constant uncertainty. Supplies sometimes failed to arrive for days because rough seas prevented boats from reaching the reef safely. Fresh drinking water had to be rationed carefully. Food spoiled quickly in damp conditions. Simple repairs became difficult when replacement materials remained miles away on the mainland. Accidents were an accepted part of the job. Heavy granite blocks could slip during lifting. Strong waves knocked workers from temporary platforms. Ropes snapped without warning after months of exposure to salt and moisture. Medical help often remained hours away, leaving crews to depend upon one another until rescue became possible. Despite those dangers, experienced builders returned season after season. Years of practical knowledge taught them how to judge changing weather, secure lifting equipment, handle stone safely, and recognize small warning signs before serious problems developed. Their education came through observation and experience rather than formal classrooms. Apprentices learned beside veteran craftsmen. Young workers watched every movement, copied proven techniques, and gradually accepted greater responsibility as their confidence grew. Much of that knowledge existed only in conversation and daily practice. Very little was ever written into instruction manuals. Eventually, construction methods began changing. Steam machinery reduced dependence on manpower. Concrete replaced many traditional stone designs. Modern cranes reached places where timber lifting systems once struggled. Faster transportation shortened supply routes that had challenged earlier generations for months at a time. Those improvements increased efficiency, yet they also marked the gradual disappearance of specialized skills that had defined lighthouse construction for centuries. Fewer craftsmen mastered complex stone fitting by hand. Traditional rope rigging became increasingly uncommon. The quiet expertise that once passed naturally from mentor to apprentice slowly faded from everyday life. Even now, the builders continue speaking through their work. Every tightly fitted joint, carefully aligned wall and weathered granite block reflects decisions made long before electricity, diesel engines or hydraulic cranes changed construction forever. Their greatest legacy was never simply the lighthouse itself. It was the extraordinary craftsmanship hidden inside every stone. Time transformed construction methods, but it never erased the proof those workers left behind. The final chapter reveals why many of their stone towers continue standing against the ocean after more than a century of relentless storms. The next time a lighthouse appears on a distant coastline, remember that its greatest strength wasn't built by machines. It was earned through human skill, patience, and relentless teamwork. If you enjoyed this story of forgotten engineering, subscribe for more historical construction documentaries, and thanks for watching.